Commissioners meeting. We have 3 meetings this evening. We have a police committee meeting, a legal affairs committee meeting, and a board of commissioners meeting. But before we start, please silence your cell phones. There's amplifying equipment for the hearing impaired up here for use during the meeting. And when the floor is open for public comment, comment will first be taken from those of you who are here in the room tonight, and after that, those who are attending virtually on Zoom. If you're here in the room, we ask that you use this podium to your left, to my right, and it's important that you speak directly into the microphone. If you don't, you can hear yourself, but we cannot hear you. So just you get really close to that microphone. And feel free to adjust it if necessary. For those of you who are on Zoom, if you wish to make a comment, just raise your virtual hand, and the township secretary will promote you into the meeting when it is time for you to make comment. Anyone who is speaking here this evening, please be sure at the beginning of your comments to introduce yourself and say where in the township that you live. Also, if you're making comments this evening, please be aware that as the practice of this board tonight and all other nights that we take comment, that if it is appropriate for the board to respond to you, we do that at the end after all the comments are made. We don't respond to questions or comments along the way, but we will respond at the end. So with that, we're going to start tonight's meetings. We're going to start with the police committee, and I recognize its chair, Commissioner McComb.
Thank you, Chris. We have 2 items on the police committee agenda tonight, one involving possible disciplinary action against a police officer, and the other has to do with possible ordinance change. So on the first item, we'll hear from our superintendent of police, Michael McGrath. Superintendent?
Yes, as you outlined, this is a personnel matter which is discussed with the board in executive session based on violation of policy and procedures. We're recommending a 1-day suspension for an officer.
Okay, and I'm going to make a note that we do not really discuss human resources issues in the public. There was a discussion of it in pre-board. Does anybody have any comments or questions for our superintendent? Any public questions or comments? Or anybody in the room? Jody, anybody online? Okay, I'll put out the motion that we consider for recommendation of the Board of Commissioners approval of a disciplinary action for a police officer as recommended by the Superintendent of Police. Do I have a second? Commissioner McKean, thank you. We'll call the vote. All in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Madam Secretary, that passes unanimously. The next item is authorization to advertise an ordinance for no stopping or standing on Clairemont Road. On that, we'll hear from our Director of Parking Services, Jerry Adams. Director Adams, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Commissioners. Take you back about a year. Right before the Black Rock School opened, we had a temporary situation that we tried to resolve with some no stopping or standing, certain distances as specified by the township's Traffic Safety Department. Those restrictions, temporary, experimental, worked very well. We had very few issues called into the police department or parking services. So we'd like to make that formal codification and get that approved so that we can put that in the code for good.
Okay, so this is the nature of a public safety ordinance to better protect students who are being driven or unloaded at the school, correct?
Correct. It is also a goal to keep cars from pulling onto the side streets and stopping to drop off their children while other vehicles are stuck or are waiting on Montgomery Avenue. It was a twofold experiment / temporary measure that seemed to work very well. We did have a diagram, but it's not showing up on my screen share. If anyone would like to see it, just pass that around. The red areas are the areas in question. That is Spruce Lane on North Stone Ridge in Clairemont.
Okay, as that's making its rounds, are there any commissioner comments or questions about this proposed ordinance? Are there any public comment on this proposed ordinance from anyone in the room? Jody, anybody online?
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, so put out the motion that we consider for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise a notice of intent to adopt an ordinance amending the Code of the Township of Lower Merion, 145 Vehicles and Traffic, Section 145-114, Schedule 19, stopping or standing prohibited by establishing an ordinance Clairemont, an ordinance stopping or standing prohibited on Wednesday, 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Regulation on Clairemont Road, Villanova, from West Montgomery Avenue to 235 feet west on both sides. North Stone Ridge Lane, Villanova, from West Montgomery Avenue to 410 feet west, both sides. Spruce Lane, Villanova, from West Montgomery Avenue to 200 feet north and east on both sides. Do I have a second? Commissioner Kramer, thank you very much. I'll call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand, signifying aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Madam Secretary, that passes unanimously. And President Steiner, that concludes the work of the Business Committee, or Police Committee.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McCollum. With that, we will turn to the Legal Affairs Committee, and I recognize its co-chair, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you, though, with deference to the chair, the vice chair. Thank you for that promotion. We have one item on the agenda. This is a resolution authorizing acquisition of property at 1805 Youngsford Road. I'm just looking to see if there's any explanation. I guess not. There's no presentation.
I can explain if you'd like.
Well, if you want to, a few sentences.
This is a property that sits adjacent to a property the township owns, for which the Board of Commissioners has been interested in placing an athletic field on the property. But in order to make it work properly, there's a need to acquire this adjacent lot, which has been vacant. However, a development company had started the process to build a home on the property. If the board goes through with this action, the solicitor would file a declaration of taking, which should stop continued action on the property, and then we'll establish through a process that goes forward what the appropriate value of the property is that the township would need to pay the property owner.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just say, the ward commissioner in this area, I endorse this resolution. If we're not able to, well, we weren't able to acquire the property otherwise. Everyone, I think, knows the township needs new athletic fields. In this case, this site is adjacent to a township-owned property. It's right next to the expressway, and just as important, it is immediately adjacent to the Richie Ashburn baseball field. So it's a good location for us to be putting a new field on. So with that, I'm going to move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners adoption of a resolution authorizing a declaration of taking necessary to acquire vacant property at 1805 Youngsford Road, Gladwin, for development of a recreational playing field. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Are there any commissioner questions or comments on this? See none. Is there any public comment on this matter? Please, sir.
Yes, I'm John Willis from North Baltimore, and I strongly support the acquisition of this property by Lower Merion Township, even if it's unbelievable by any domain. I rise only because I had written an email to Mr. McNeely, and I think I CC'd a couple of the commissioners, to a point that is set forth in his memorandum to all you folks. And to the point that I have been studying for the past year, actually past 2 years. And if this is something that, in light of the delicate situation of this, that you want to discuss with me privately or now publicly, I could understand that in light of the fact that I just learned from Mr. McNeely that this property is of interest to a developer. I'd rather go to Lower Merion Township than go to a developer. My concern is paragraph 4 of Mr. McNeely's memorandum, in which it states the development of the playing field will help address the shortage of such facilities for Lower Merion Township children. As I stated in my email to Mr. McNeely, because I don't want to blindside anyone, what is the basis for the facts with the studies to support that statement that there is a shortage of athletic fields in Lower Merion Township. Simple question. I don't know what the procedures are with respect to this committee, but that's all I'm asking for. If you want to do it at a later time, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Is there anyone online?
No.
Okay, I would note that the board did receive an email from Michael Pollack from Ardmore, who wrote in support of obtaining the property, and the commissioners have all been provided with a copy of those comments. So unless there's any other comments from commissioners, I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Any opposed? Raise your hand. One opposed. Any abstentions? So the motion carries. Commissioner O'Neill, can we put this on the consent calendar? Okay, thank you. That concludes the business of legal affairs.
All right, thank you very much, Vice Chair Kraus.
Thank you.
With that, we will call the June 21st, 2023 meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Township of Lower Merion to order, and all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Bernheim and Mr. Gavin have asked to be excused. Mr. Churchill.
Here.
Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Grimes.
Here.
Ms. S. Kramer. Here. Ms. G. Kramer. Here. Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. McKeon.
Here.
Ms. O'Neill. Here. Mr. Stevenson.
Present.
Mr. Whalen.
Here.
Mr. Zello.
Here.
Mr. Sinai.
Here.
Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. So I'll now move that we approve the minutes of the special meetings of the Board of Commissioners held on May 3rd, 2023 and May 10th, 2023, and a stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners held on May 17th, 2023 as distributed. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Madam Secretary, that passes unanimously. A few announcements. The board met in executive session on Wednesday, June 7th, 2023, Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, and earlier this evening regarding the following matters. Disciplinary action for a police officer involved in a car accident, an acquisition of a property at 1805 Youngsford Road, and personnel matters related to the new assistant township manager, the police department, and the library department. A capital improvement plan workshop will be held on Wednesday, June 28th, that's a week from today, at approximately 6 p.m. And then Tuesday, July 4th, 2023, Independence Day is a legal holiday. The Township Administration Building and the libraries will be closed for business. There'll be no refuse and recycling collection that day. It will be on holiday schedule that week. The stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners for August will be held on Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023 at approximately 7 p.m. So that concludes the announcements. We now turn to the public privilege of the floor. And this is the section of our meeting where members of the public may address the board on any non-agenda items. Meaning if you have something about an agenda item, please hold that. Or any other public matters in which the township has jurisdiction or authority. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, if you wish to address the board, when you come up to this podium here, please start by stating your name and where in the township you live. And it is the policy that we ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. If there are a group of people in attendance who are speaking on the same topic and you've come together, we ask that you get together and have one of you tell us and take 5 minutes to do that. It just makes the meeting run more efficiently. So if you are in the room, we'll turn to people online in a second. If you're in the room and you wish to take advantage of public privilege, please come to this podium.
Good evening, Township Commissioners. My name is Danielle Ingerman-Waltzer. This is my husband, Aaron Waltzer. We are Gladwin residents, and I wrote something because last time I didn't, and I regretted it. So, a few months ago, I was able to attend and very briefly present my plight for a full renovation of the Gladwin Playground at the last Commissioners meeting. As a byproduct of the subject at that meeting, where hundreds in the room, including the entire Lower Merion Police Department, were in attendance, I suspect that my presentation was not the most memorable of action items on the agenda that evening. In light of that, I'm back here this evening to follow up on our discussion and better understand the next steps as we move forward. As a reminder, I am a lifelong Lower Merion Township resident, a mother of 3, all under 6, and a die-hard advocate for them, especially my 4-year-old daughter Ivy, who has various special and medical needs. She is yet to have an appropriate school placement within the district, and as such, the local playgrounds and enrichment opportunities are critical. At the last commissioners meeting I attended, I spoke about the update that I felt was necessary and long overdue for our local Gladwin Park playground. I handed out a presentation. In particular, I showed how other parks now include accessible walkways, flooring, pictures, sensory equipment, swings, zip lines, you name it. Clearly, Gladwin is void of these, Gladwin Park. Most Lower Merion Township playgrounds, unfortunately, are. It has been acknowledged by a majority of the board, both through individual and group conversation, that there's a great need to update many of the local township playgrounds. But where I reside in Gladwin, I feel is a great missed opportunity. My push is not just for my daughter, but for the greater community and all of the kids. Being a pandemic parent further emphasized what most of you already know, that outdoor enrichment is vital for all ages. As of our last interaction, Commissioner Whalen had advised that in June, the ARP funding allocation for this particular project would be determined and that the project commencement would be bumped up a year and come to fruition in 2024, which is wonderful. We had just spoken to Commissioner Whalen and he informed us of a couple of updates, so I will skip over that part. In the interim, while this process has been going on, I have researched, contacted, and met with several nationally acclaimed playground developers and product manufacturers. I met with the Gladwin Civic Association, disability advocates, many local support groups, municipal educators, all in support of this. Tonight we have Matt Burns, who has some comments. Okay. It's not a formal thing. They mocked it up for us. We've taken the time to create a presentation for the board. You can review it, not at this immediate time. Just want him to say his few things. But the presentation reflects our vision for the new and improved Gladwin Park and Playground. Before I hand it over to him, I just want to reiterate that pretty much everyone I've spoken to is on board with this. They're looking for additional enrichment opportunities outside at the playgrounds in Lower Merion Township, in particular also Gladwin Park.
Yeah. My name is Matt Burns. I work for Competent Playgrounds. I just want to describe what I handed out. The Walters reached out to me and asked me to work with them on a conceptual playground layout for an inclusive playground. The company specializes in inclusive playgrounds, so we worked together, put together some conceptual designs for Gladwin Park. The 2 presentations, one's just a more condensed version that shows the 2 different layouts, and the other version is the longer, more extensive version that when I met with Danielle, Aaron, our design team, this is the layout that we put together to make a more inclusive playground.
All right, thank you.
Joseph Abramson, Bala, Cynwyd. First, I just wanted to know if you have an update on the radar detector law bill that gets introduced every year. Because there are times when I'm not on my bike and I'm actually driving, and I'm driving leisurely down Montgomery Avenue, and there are cars coming down in my, the rearview mirror about to hit me. And I was told once by a police officer, it's better to be safe than to be dead. So that forces me to speed up. If we would have some sort of local options, that would be great. I also wanted to mention that recently I've been renting an electric car. It's fun to drive, but it's difficult to charge, especially if you don't have a home in Lower Merion. Now, later we're going to be discussing plastic bags, but if you want to start getting people more excited to buy an electric car or even a plug-in hybrid, there has to be some sort of infrastructure in place. Because, you know, while I could sit for half hour at the Acme or Giant, and I'm sure they don't mind Acme or Giant, it's something that, you know, you don't really want to do, especially if it's at 11 o'clock at night. But if there was some more infrastructure, even somehow changing the parking meters to be, you know, the slow trickle plugs, that would help. I also wanted to mention regarding biking. Again, I asked if, you know, you can somehow put more bike parking in the township. And, you know, they have these things that attach to parking meters. They have things that go in between parking meters. And another option that I've seen recently in Easton, Pennsylvania, is where the government had a collaboration with local art students to develop sculptures that were also usable. I forgot the technical term, but it's an art sculpture, but it was also bike parking. You know, doing that can help people bike a bit more. And finally, to help that, we kind of need safe biking. You know, as we always say, we're a first-class township, but when I'm biking in Lower Merion and then I cross City Avenue to go in Philadelphia, it doesn't seem like we're the first-class township. So I think we need to, you know, figure something out. Like I know there's Wynwood Road or East Wynwood where it goes from 2 lanes to 1 lane. The 1 lane and then it has bike path. The traffic seems to be moving fine with 1 lane. So if we can do that in other places, first of all, it will slow down traffic. It will also slow down through traffic. Because a lot of the people driving on Conshohocken and Montgomery are just driving from 476 to City Avenue and out. So it's a win-win for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public privilege?
John Willis again from North Baltimore. I think the survey that you sent out, Lower Merion Township, was very well received. The only downside is the deadline is June 18th, you have to submit by June 18th. So people, including me, that was not the best deadline because at the same time, a lot of people were going to graduations, high school graduation, college graduation, this was Father's Day. And I was wondering if there's any chance that the deadline could be, it's passed, could be extended in order that we get more participants to respond to your survey, which I think is absolutely terrific. And the second point is, and I don't know the answer to this, was the survey sent to those people who may be less savvy when it comes to using social media, Facebook, and whatever.
Thank you. Anyone else for public privilege? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Oshka Lazar. I'm a Marion resident. I have a question about tree county plan. I know in 2022 the adopted budget included a $50,000 line item for funding to complete a tree county collection and planning study. In 2022 June, the Shade Commission provided language to the staff to complete an RFP, request for proposal, and that has not proceeded to get advertised since then. In 2023, the budget got reduced to $40,000, so lost $10,000 from the budget. And I just wonder what the justification is for that. It said in the budget that the decrease due to the revised cost estimate, but we were told at the Shade Commission that we have to limit what we're asking for, and we can't have a code review, which we felt strongly need to be included in the work because there's just not enough money to cover all the things that we like to do, which obviously people have to make compromises. I understand that, but I just wonder why the budget was reduced when there's clearly a need for the work and why it hasn't proceeded for over a year. Thank you.
Anyone else for public privilege?
Good evening, Isabel Melvin, Wynwood. I'm going to quote from the PA Department of Agriculture website. Calorie pear, Pyrus calerana, was added to the Pennsylvania noxious weed list in November 2021. Today is June 21st, 2023. I'm going to continue the quote, sorry. As a noxious weed, calorie pear may no longer be distributed, cultivated, or propagated within the state of Pennsylvania. However, when I go to Lower Merion Township's website, I go to Township Recommended List of Trees, Chapter A-177, Planting Materials and Specifications. Caleriana is listed as a recommended plant to the residents of Lower Merion Township. So, just like the spotted lanternfly, noxious invasive shrubs and trees cut short or invade native good pollinator plants that keep our crops healthy and our water clean. Native plants filter water pollution along our creeks and rivers and also encourage pollination of the plant food we eat. So I have two questions. Why is the calorie pear a noxious invasive that is banned by the state of Pennsylvania, recommended on the Lower Merion Township recommended list of trees to residents of Lower Merion Township as of June 21st, 2023? And that's my first question. My second question is, who is responsible for updating the website and township code? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room wish to take advantage of public privilege? Okay, seeing none. Jody, do we have anyone online?
Adrian Seltzer is online. I'm going to promote her to a panelist.
Okay.
I didn't get any more light in here, but Adrian Seltzer, Winwood, hello everyone. I hope you are doing well. I've been exceedingly busy the last couple months and haven't been here to communicate with you. But I was wondering if there will be any outreach to the NAACP mainline branch regarding the policing incident and community policing. That's all I have right now for stuff that is not on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jody, anyone else?
No one else.
Okay. So that concludes public privilege. We received written comments, which I will summarize. To practice of the board that we receive written comments, we sort of briefly summarize them here. If you wish to see the full text, they're available from the township secretary. Lisa Fusaro is the president of the Belmont Hills Civic Association, Stuart Klein from the Belmont Hills Library Board, John Mayer, the treasurer of the Belmont Hills Library Board, and Michelle Detweiler is the president of the Penn Valley Civic Association, wrote in support of funding and expansion of the Belmont Hill Library patio through the Capital Improvement Program. Stephen Green from Ardmore, Mary Micas from Ardmore, and Christopher Reynolds from Ardmore wrote with concerns regarding a specific neighbor on their street in the response of the police department to complaints about this individual. And Jason Young from Haverford wrote with concerns about traffic safety on Montgomery Avenue. And Michael Pollack from Ardmore wrote about numerous topics. And the entire board has received copies of all of these, the entire text of these public comments. So with that, that's public privilege. Does any member of the board wish to respond to public privilege? Commissioner Sean Kramer.
Thank you. I'd just like to respond to Ms. Seltzer's question about outreach to the NAACP. The Police Engagement Committee has completed its recommendations and has presented them to board leadership, and I'll be meeting with board leadership about next steps in the coming days. We do intend to reach back out to the NAACP and other community groups, and I did communicate that with the president of the NAACP recently. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Whalen.
Probably to no one's surprise, I will respond with regard to the comments about the playgrounds. As we've already discussed, this money is going through the ARP program. That project is up for vote tonight. This was determined last week at the Wednesday meeting of the Building and Planning Committee. And specifically what we're talking about is there are currently 3 playgrounds in Ardmore, each being redone this year, including a new pilot program that we're going to use with putting in a playground, kind of a mat floor instead of the current kind of tan bark substance we use. So that's exciting in that sense. And we are moving up, we have proposed, and I hope the board will vote, to move up Gladwin by 1 year. So I know we had some testimony from constituents about Gladwin Playground. It was in line to be completely redone in 2025. We are hoping to move that up to 2024 and additionally add a separate fully accessible playground in the township, which will be part of the ARP monies. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Whalen. Commissioner McKeon.
Thank you, President Sinai. Very briefly, I just wanted to thank Stu Klein, John Mayer, Michelle Detweiler, and Lisa Fusaro for their comments about the Belmont Hills Library patio extension. I think this project is important to the community. On June 28th, 2023, we will have our CIP, Capital Improvement Plan workshop. It begins at 6 p.m. There is no public comment because it is just a workshop, so this was an appropriate time, and I appreciate them making comments for this meeting. And when we have our meeting on the 28th, I'll try to incorporate their comments into it, and I'm hoping we can have a conversation for the project at that meeting.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner McKeon. Commissioner McComb.
Thank you, President Simon. Mr. Abramson, with respect to your comments, I think I speak for every member of the board that we would like nothing better than to have radar available to us. I think I speak for most of the police department. They would like that too. It's important. I think that's a subject that comes up all the time, speeding in the township. I was at a meeting last night with the neighborhood club with Bala, Cynwyd, which I know you attend sometimes with Commissioner McKeon, Commissioner Kramer. We had an extended discussion as to the dangers of people speeding in the township and how it makes it unsafe, but we were hampered by the fact that we can't use radar. We are in touch with our state elected officials. They monitor it. They're pushing to get that done. I don't know the exact status of it, but as soon as there is the possibility for us to do something, I assure you we will act promptly because we want to get radar. With respect to your questions about bike racks, as you know, there's a streetscaping plan for the City Avenue Special Services District. My understanding is that additional bike racks are included in that. I know you've raised that in the past with respect to the federal shopping center. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's something we're going to follow up on. Mr. Melman, there you are. With respect to your question, you had 2 questions. My understanding is the Shade Tree Commission is responsible for the list, or it used to be. I see somebody shaking their head, but I think that's right. My understanding was that at some point it was the Shade Tree Commission. That may have changed. It's confusing. I know that at one point we had the London plane tree on both the recommended and the do not plant list, which is obviously confusing. In the case of the calorie pear, it's confused me because the Bradford pear is an invasive and not to be used, but there are other species of calorie pears such as the Cleveland and the red spire that are well adapted for certain conditions. So it's a little bit more complicated than one would think, but it is a bit confusing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Commissioner O'Neill.
Oh, thank you very much, President Sinai. I'm just responding to Mr. Abramson's comments regarding radar, and to echo my colleagues' comments. For sure, it's something that we've been monitoring for close to a decade at this point, trying to work with our legislators in Harrisburg to get something through. In late March this year, Senator Rothman, who is from the Harrisburg area, did introduce Senate Bill 459, passed near unanimously in the Transportation Committee of the Senate. It's sitting. And the House, we know that's going to be a tough burden for them to be able to move it up. There's no bill named for it. It's effectively not going anywhere at the moment, but we're not giving up. And Lower Merion and many other townships across the state have partnered with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, the Pennsylvania State Police. We're really trying in new and creative ways to try and jumpstart that conversation. The biggest point of contention among some House and Senate members from the western part of the state is the revenue share. There's a fundamental lack of understanding about what the return to us locally would be, and that is capped at 1%. The rest will go into the motor licensing fund. It gets technical, but very happy to discuss it offline if you have others have questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. Any other commissioners wish to respond to public privilege? Okay, so I'm going to ask our township manager to maybe just update us on how the survey went in response to that question.
Sure. With respect to the survey, we have no plans to extend the deadline. No matter when you set the deadline, there's going to be somebody who says you need another day, another week. We got great results from both the open survey portion, but the more important, we got even better results from the returns on the scientific survey, where folks were selected randomly by geographic sections of the township, and they were actually invited to respond either electronically or on paper, so they had the opportunity to use either medium. Our survey company, who we contracted to do this project, indicated our results were both on both the open survey and the scientific random survey. So we should actually be seeing a report here sometime before the end of summer.
All right, thank you, Manager McNeely. Just to add to, well, thanks to everyone who made comments tonight. In response to the several comments about the trees, this board recently had a priority setting meeting where one of the items on it, in part in recognition that we've received a bunch of materials from the Shade Tree Commission that we have yet to act on, has been setting up a process to start looking at some holistic approach to trees in this township. My read of the responses that we got, the scoring responses we got back from the commissioners, is that that is one of the items that rated most highly in terms of priorities for the board for this year. So that is something that I expect that we will be working on in continuing to work on this year. Okay, so that concludes public privilege. We turn to public comment. This is a section of our meeting where members of the public may address the board on any agenda items. Again, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And again, if there are a group of people speaking on the same thing, please have a representative come and speak for 5 minutes. All comments related to agenda items, including the ordinance regulating single-use plastic bags, this should be made now. If you have comments related to the addition of the 335 Writers Ferry Road property to the Historic Resources inventory, that gets held to when we talk about it in the public hearing on that ordinance later this evening. And then with regard, if you have comments about the ordinance about wireless facilities, it is my intention that we are going to continue that public hearing and actually postpone action on those ordinances until the July 19th Board of Commissioners meeting. So if you're here and you want to comment on it now, we would be delighted to hear about it. So with that, anyone who wishes to take advantage of public comment, please join us at this podium.
Again, from North Ardmore, just a point of procedure, is the item from the Legal Affairs Committee that was just, I believe, voted on going to be...
Yeah, this would be the appropriate time to comment on that. This would be the appropriate time to comment on that,
So
yes.
it will be voted on by the Board of Commissioners?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Leslie Greenberg, Marion Station, 32-year resident. I'm here to talk about the traffic calming issue that is on the consent calendar. I am not against the speed bumps. What I am here to talk about is the process. When it first came up in front of the commissioners on the police committee, our two co-presidents of the Marion Civic did not know anything about it. And that is why I'm here, one of the main reasons. We didn't know anything about the issue coming before the commissioners, and it was approved on the police committee. And for 6 speed bumps. And we're not sure whether we really need 6 speed bumps. I talked to the superintendent of police, and he gave me a suggestion to talk to Sergeant Ruggiero. Unfortunately, he eventually retired, so whatever we talked about was not relayed to the new Sergeant Colfish. In general, I feel that we should have known more about the traffic calming issue and the speed bumps. I brought it up at several of the civic meetings, and I won't say I was stonewalled, but at one meeting I was told, those are private meetings. I don't know why it should be private. We're not against it. We want to work together with everybody in our district, and I don't think it was discussed thoroughly. I'm leaving some of the things out because there were many issues involved, and I spoke with Commissioner Sinai. I've talked to Commissioner Zeloff at one time, and I spoke with the traffic committee several times, but I did not get complete answers, and I think it should be a more open process. There's nothing wrong with speed bumps, but it has to be open, and I'm not getting that response. And I'm doing it as a private citizen and also part of the civic. That was part of my role to do certain things with what comes before the board. I have much more to talk about it, but I'm not going to mention names, and I'm not going to cast any negative comments, but I think that the board has to consider a more open procedure for the speed bumps, period, because it's going to create a better atmosphere for everybody where the speed bumps occur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Anyone else for public comment?
Thank you. Joseph Abramson, Bala, Cynwyd. First, with regards to playgrounds, when I lived in New Jersey, there was an organization, a national organization called Kaboom, that provides grants to playgrounds. I don't know if Lower Merion qualifies, but that might be something to look into. It's called Kaboom. Anyways, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I stand before you to express my strong opposition to the final approval of the exception for the construction of a new mixed-use building at 202-216 Bala Avenue and 5 North Highland Avenue. It is with deep concern that I address this matter as it directly impacts the future of our beloved community. Throughout this entire process, our neighborhood has expressed legitimate concerns and apprehensions about the proposed developments. We have worked tirelessly to protect the character and integrity of our community, striving for responsible and neighborhood-friendly development. Despite these concerns, the Building and Planning Committee has granted an exception, allowing the project to move forward. Now, as the decision rests in your hands, I implore you to carefully reconsider and take into account the wishes and best interests of our community. One of the primary concerns we raised throughout this process is the impact on public parking spaces. The initial plans disregarded the importance of preserving these spaces despite changes in zoning regulations that were specifically implemented to protect them. By granting this exception, we risk sacrificing the convenience and accessibility of public parking, which is vital for the vibrancy and success of local businesses and services. Furthermore, the history of this project raises serious doubts about the developer's commitment to our community. A previously constructed building with retail space has remained vacant since its completion, leaving us questioning the viability and success of the proposed development. Our trust in the developer has been shaken, and we urge you to consider this when making your decision. As representatives of our community, I urge you to prioritize the well-being of our neighborhood, uphold the current zoning code, and honor the wishes and aspirations of your constituents. The decisions made today will shape the future of our community for years to come. Let us work together to ensure that any development aligned with our vision preserve the character of our neighborhood and contribute positively to our collective well-being. I respectfully request that you can reconsider the final approval. Please take into account the concerns raised by the community and weigh them against the potential impact on public parking, the track record of the developer, and overall best interests of our neighborhood. One of the reasons why we redid the zoning code was because of the development, and specifically this development. Now you're going to say, well, let's make an exception. As I said before, it's a sunken cost fallacy. Instead of just digging and digging and digging, cut the losses and we'll have another development that more in line. If you're not willing to do that, and you are going to grant an exception to Lower Merion rule or code, I also humbly request an exception to Lower Merion taxes. As you know, inflation is 7%, 8%, and many people, even if they got a raise of 1 or 2%, it clearly didn't go above inflation. So I would also request that I get an exception for paying Lower Merion taxes. And I think the community won't mind that as well. So thank you.
And thank you.
I'd like this, I have photographs of it.
You can give those to the township secretary at the end of the, and why don't you make your public comment and.
Good evening. My name is Alicia and Josie. I live in Bala, Cynwyd. I live next to the lot that Cross Properties is asking for an extension of time to develop. I would like to respond directly to statements made by Commissioner McComb last week. Ooh, I didn't mean that. That was next. Last week you said that approximately 1 car every 40 minutes comes down Bala Avenue. The statement seemed both generalized and a way to shut down public comments in a mocking way. Sir, I don't see you backing up your statement with data or survey results. So I'm letting you know that in a period of about 5 minutes on a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I saw 9 cars come down Bala Ave, and that is without any new construction occurring. While this is in no way any sort of official government data, we could do some math. That projection would be 72 cars in 40 minutes compared to your statement of 1 car every 40 minutes. That math just ain't mathin'. Currently, there's only 1 stop sign at the intersection of Bala Ave and Highland Ave. The plan that I reviewed does not even have the consideration of a 3-way stop, and yet you're looking to increase foot traffic along this corridor. Additionally, Commissioner McComb, I question your statement because by saying the traffic is not a worry on Bala Avenue, you are implying that the construction of 83 new apartments and 5,000 square feet of retail or food and bar establishment will not increase the traffic. So, are you saying you don't think this project will be successful? Your statement implies that with all of this new construction, there will be no impact on the traffic that is already much more than what you think it is. So that tells me that you're either out of touch with the current state of this stretch of road or that you don't think this will succeed. Which is it? You also made the statement that the Cynwyd line, the SEPTA Regional Rail Cynwyd line, is suspended and the parking in that lot is not an issue. Again, your statement is dismissive and somewhat mocking to the public, but also out of touch. Because if you actually rode the Cynwyd line, you would know that the suspension is temporary and due to the I-95 bridge collapse. If you don't know what I'm referring to, please Google it. This closure and construction on 95 is set to reopen this weekend. So if SEPTA plans are what they said they were, then by all accounts, the temporary suspension of the Cynwyd line would then be lifted. I also want to impress upon everyone here, especially the people that are up for re-election or who will be newly elected. Your platforms tout sustainability and revitalizing the Bala Ave corridor, but by saying things like this, specific plot is not an issue. What you are saying is nobody really uses this regional rail line and dismissing those of us that do. Since the pandemic restrictions have lifted, there has been an increase in ridership. I don't recall seeing any of you on the train, which I use about 4 times a week, so I don't expect any of you to acknowledge its importance for commuters. Does it rival the Paoli line? Absolutely not. But this is a single rail commuter line with a limited schedule. So if you're really interested in a thriving corridor with sustainability, your priority, you also need to start having conversations with SEPTA about increasing public transportation in the area. Having 83 apartments in a business space means needing employees who will also likely have cars. I implore you to do surveys, and if you will not, at least make the intersections of Bala and Highland Avenues a three-way stop sign. Simple solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Barry Polis. I'm a resident of Bala Avenue for 40 years. Speaking to deny the extension of the approval for 2006-16 Bala Avenue and 5-9 North Highland Avenue. As you are aware, the zoning was changed from the 2018 zoning to the 2020 zoning, and this was done because our zoning department found that the zoning change was, the first zoning change was inadequate and created a problem, so that the zoning had to be changed so we were not giving away municipal parking places, which belong to the township, to a developer to satisfy his parking requirement. By this approval expiring, which is now expired as of April of this year, having given 5 years, this mistake that the township made of giving away this parking has expired, and we now have a chance to use the new zoning law, which I believe we should do. Now let's, and really, the public parking aspect was obviously a mistake, or we wouldn't have had to change the zoning laws. Item 2. When I spoke here last week, one of the commissioners said, I want to forget about the past and move to the future. That's not the way things work in life. We don't forget about the past. We learn from the past, we adapt, and we move forward. I provided you all with a picture of a previous development made by this developer, which is 1 block from City Line Avenue, 1 block from Bala Avenue, at the corner of Union and Cynwyd Road. This was almost an identical project. This is 86 apartments with 7,500 square feet of commercial space. In the course of over 3 years, this space has remained vacant. There have been 2 commercial real estate firms that have attempted to rent this commercial space. It has not rented. Why has it not rented? Because there is not enough parking and because the development is too dense. By following the new zoning laws, the structure that is being proposed here on Bala Avenue will be reduced by 16 apartments, which indeed is an improvement, and still the project is too long. It's too large. Now, I would like to see development in Bala, and I would love to see a store come in that would be the likes of a Tavern or a Dwayne Reed, which would support the neighborhood. However, when you have this type of density and you're giving away public parking, you're not going to acquire a tenant. And that just seems to be point and fact. Now, if you do change the zoning, I do not believe that diminishing the zoning size, the apartment size, is going to prohibit development at all. I think development will go forward regardless of the zoning being enforced, which is for the public good. Really, the only one that benefits from an extension to the previous zoning is the developer. The community does not develop. Also, I beg you to consider that,
I've given you some extra time here.
Wrap it up.
Okay, please.
I also want to beg you to consider that if indeed you do allow this extension to the zoning to this previous zoning, there are probably 6 to 10 other apartment developments that have a 5-year window that are coming to expire. You will establish a precedent to these other developments that once their zoning expires, that they will be able to get an extension.
Yes,
I
Mr.
say
Polis, now I
enforce the
really
current
need to
zoning
wrap it
law
up.
change and force the developer to adapt the project appropriately.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Carla Moran from Marion. I'm
going to speak on the same topic that the prior speakers have been talking about. First of all, I wish I could just repeat verbatim everything that Mr. Abramson said. I completely support it, and I think it should really, I wish it would be foremost in the decision-making of all of you. Secondly, I was interested in the point about the SEPTA line. I believe it's the R6 that's in that area on Bala, on North Bala Avenue. So I'd like to ask Commissioner McComb and maybe Commissioner Kramer about that, because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that part of the idea, the vision of the NOBA and why it would work with what is turning out to be inadequate parking from what's observed now with 2/3 of it built. I thought that the idea was, well, the R6 was going to be expanded, the service and so on, so therefore it justified decisions that were made about the parking back in 2017, 2018, when the full project was approved, and for which now you're being asked to extend the third part, having heard more than once from the residents about the parking issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come on up.
Paul Noe from Ardmore. I just came to speak about the single-use plastic bags there. First, let me start off saying I'm all for the environment and everything like this, but NPR has a great article, if you haven't gotten a chance to look at it, just about how these bag bans are completely counterproductive, how basically what ends up happening is people just buy more plastic bags, and these plastic bags are reused consistently. People use them in their trash bags, they use them to pick up after their dogs. If you ever have to put a diaper away or anything like that, a single-use plastic bag is a great use for something like that. So really what happens is these are counterproductive. I have family up in New York, so when I go to visit them at Christmas time, they all tell me bring up plastic bags, like it's like contraband that you have to bring up there now to share with your family members. So I was wondering, one of the notes here in the statute here was that the township is paying the cost related to cleanup of the single-use plastic bags. I was wondering if that number is available, how much the township spends cleaning up these bags. I mean, is this going to be something where the township is spending money, but all the citizens now are going to have to contribute $20 million more to buy all these plastic bags, to buy these reusable bags, to get paper bags, to buy their Glad bags at the grocery store? So I was wondering if there was any actual numbers around this that support making this change here. So that was all I really had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room for public comment? Okay, seeing none. Jody, do we have anyone online who there?
Yes, Adrian Seltzer, and I'll promote her to a panelist.
Okay.
I still haven't turned on the lights. Adrian Seltzer, Winwood. I have two things I have questions on. On the approval of the American Rescue Plan allocations, is there more detail than what is there in the agenda? I see it says South Ardmore Park Playground, yay. So when it says accelerate playground and renovations, it has the same number. So is that also for South Ardmore Park and accessible playground? If that's, am I reading that correctly? Two, nonprofit grants. Hoping that the board has paid attention to the countless people coming before you about help that the area food banks need, and that would be grants that would be given in that area, and if so, how does one apply? All right, so, and then any more detail that we can have on that. Next, on the zoning in Bala and the exception that you guys voted on last week. I come to these meetings or watch them on a semi-regular basis. And I have listened with dismay from the board on how, well, there's nothing we can do because they're grandfathered in about projects that are going forward that are out of scale, for lack of a better word. Well, here you have a chance to say, hey, we can do something about that. They missed the boat, let them go. Is there anything in the zoning code at all on granting an exception when somebody doesn't complete or start their project in the allotted time? If there's nothing in the code about allowing that, how can you allow it? And I think it also might be a legal breach too, but I haven't done all the checking, as much of the checking as I need to. But I think you should at least table it until you find out that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Seltzer. Jody, is that the remaining public comment?
That is.
Okay. So we received written comments, which I will summarize if the person did not speak here tonight. Again, if you'd like to read the full text of the comments, you can contact the Township Secretary. Salim Platt from Wynwood wrote in opposition to adopting the ordinance regulating single-use plastic carry-out bags. We received public comment from Barry Polis from Bala, but he spoke here tonight. And Michael Pollock from Ardmore wrote regarding numerous agenda items. Does any board member wish to respond to public comment? Commissioner McComb.
Thanks, Mrs. Hines. With respect to the resident who raised the issue of Bala Avenue, I did not mean to be dismissive of your comments last week. My comment that Bala Avenue reminded me of a scene from To Kill a Mockingbird where the dog could take a nap in the middle of Bala Avenue and sleep for about a half an hour without being disturbed was meant to be a funny aside. It was not intended to be a traffic study. I don't think anybody would understand that to be a scientific traffic study. I understand you did some sort of traffic count, but you may have counted me because I was up and down Bala Avenue several times on Saturday and Sunday. I actually did walk my dog over there. I drove up and down a few times. So I'm over there a lot. I've lived in Bala for 25 years, and I've been over there. I'm very familiar with what is happening on Bala Avenue. With respect to the Cynwyd line, I haven't seen you on the Cynwyd line. I ride it every week. I also take the 44 bus every week. And with respect to my interest in it, I've been an advocate for it. When the pandemic, when SEPTA shut it down, I, along with Terry Foley, met with Ken Lawrence, who's the vice chair of the SEPTA board, and really begged him to reopen it, and he did. I'm working now with Commissioner McKean, Commissioner Kramer, Mary Jo Daly, other elected officials to get something out to Ken Lawrence and Leslie Richards, who I've known for years and who I've been in contact with, to make sure that whatever they do to get the I-95 situation addressed, which God bless Josh Shapiro, it's going to be addressed, to make sure that it's resumed because it's important. And as you point out, that much of the development we have in Bala Cynwyd is transit-oriented based, and we have built these buildings because people want to be close to transit. So that's important. So I understand, and like I said, I did not mean to be dismissive, but I've lived here long enough. I think I can make a joke about Bala Avenue because it's pretty darn sleepy. We're hoping to get it activated, and I'm not going to go into the details, but a lot of things are underway, and I think we're pretty optimistic about getting some of the vacancies filled and some more activity. But whether it's 10 cars, 20 cars, I just don't see the issue of a traffic jam on Bala Avenue, not now, probably not in the foreseeable future. If enough activity could actually generate cars, that would probably be a good thing rather than a bad thing. So, but I appreciate you making the comments. It's certainly your right to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner McComb. Commissioner Gilda Kramer.
I also wanted to respond regarding the Cynwyd line, which I commuted on for about 12 years until 4 years ago when I moved my office out of the city. And the Cynwyd line has always been of great importance to both me and to Commissioner McComb. I often rode it with him in and out of the city. Although he'd get on at a different stop than I would. I think that, I've also been an advocate for the Cynwyd line and for expanding service on it. But I think that you have to really understand that Commissioner McComb was instrumental in keeping that line open, instead of letting it be shut down totally. Because if it had to remain closed totally, we would have lost it altogether. And we understand the critical importance of this line to the neighbors, many of whom use it as their method of getting in and out of the city, and also to the future plans for Bala Cynwyd. The one thing I think that also we should consider is that the ridership has increased as developments have gone in near it. And one would hope that if there are additional units that go in on Bala Avenue, that this will increase the ridership on the Cynwyd line and enable us to advocate for better service, which has been my goal all along, is to get more regular service. So that with more regular service, there will be more ridership. Because one of the things that holds that line back is that the schedule has to comport with your own schedule in order for ridership to be feasible. So I just want you to understand that we think that this is incredibly important, and that we are advocates for it and will continue to be advocates for that line.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Commissioner Zoff.
Thank you, President Sinai. With regard to Ms. Seltzer's questions, last week in committee meetings we discussed with a significant additional information each of the recommended line items for consideration for ARP funding. To your specific questions, the South Ardmore Park Playground is for this year. That playground improvement is going to be underway in the fall. The funded amount includes a pilot of a rubber safety surface, which will be the first time we've tried that on a playground in Lower Merion. I think the other item you asked about was accelerating playground renovations. That starts with the Gladwin Playground, which is currently on the schedule for 2025, accelerating it to 2024 with the funded amount identified. Will then also cascade the other playground scheduled for replacement to also advance over the coming years. And so that's why that line item is called Accelerate Playground Renovations. You asked about the process for nonprofit grants. The staff is preparing an application process with criteria for board consideration, and with the goal is to consider that in July, and so we'll know a lot more at that time. Thank you, President Simon.
Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. Okay, I will also respond to public comment. So for Mr. Greenberg, thank you for your comments. We have spoken about this before, and in terms of the broader public outreach, we'll discuss that internally. Your comment is well taken. Just by way of background, the street that's on tonight's agenda, Latches, scored the second highest of any street that has come up in the traffic calming committee. It was pretty much off the charts in terms of need. So how does something get on the agenda? Traffic safety determines what the catchment area is of appropriate houses to do a petition. The petition was overwhelmingly positive, with only one or two houses on the entire very long street who did not join in signing that petition. Everyone else is in favor. Traffic safety and the township engineers come up with a proposal for what is the appropriate number and location of traffic calming. In this case, it was speed humps. And there are criteria that go into it, including how close can it be to an intersection, how far apart should these things be. If you put them too far apart, then people just go over one speed hump and they kind of like gun it to the next one. You get a series of people accelerating down the street. So they can't be too far apart, but they can't be too close together. And so you end up with sort of constraints that determine the numbers. And then there was a meeting of all the people who are going to potentially end up with a speed hump in front of their house, talking with traffic safety, trying to understand what the implications were. And again, even at the end of that meeting, it was overwhelmingly positive. So that's the process. I take the point that beyond the several public meetings we had on the topic here in this room, that maybe there should be more outreach, and we will take that under consideration. For the multiple comments about the property on Bala Avenue that is proposed for extension, I think anyone who listened to the board discussion last week recognizes that many of us are struggling with this situation, right? It is the whether to do an extension, whether to not do an extension. There are pluses and minuses to both of those. And what we were doing in the discussion we were having was, well, can we try and thread the needle to try and get the outcomes in Bala Avenue that at least some commissioners are looking for, which is an activated streetscape, something that doesn't have an empty lot right there, something that kind of bootstraps the street, something that increases ridership on the Cynwyd line, so the thing doesn't detract away, while not rewarding being not a good citizen, right? And not in getting something out of the extension, and that's really what I think our discussion was about. But all I can say is I think most people on this board are grappling with the same things that you are on that, and just trying to do the best that we can with that. Okay, so with that, that is public. Oh, sorry, Commissioner McGeehan. Sorry, I missed you from before. Okay.
I just wanted to comment on that. We had some comments about SEPTA earlier, and I think back about 23 years ago or so as a recent college graduate, lived in Wynwood, took the R5 into Philadelphia where I was working. It was very easy, very reliable. Fast forward 23 years and I live on Conshohocken State Road now. I work in Philadelphia and I drive to work. I have the luxury of having a car, so it makes it a little bit easier. And the reason I take a car and I don't take the train is it's just too unreliable. We don't have a lot of routes, and as I said to Commissioners McCollum and Commissioner Kramer last week, I feel that whenever there's a transportation issue, SEPTA finds some kind of way to take it out on the suburban commuters. And I think that this is an exceptionally short-sighted approach to things, and it's going to have the impact of killing the suburban commute eventually, because you turn off riders, whether it's me or somebody else. We find other ways to get to work, and we may not want to go back, or we may not even remember how to go back to taking the train. So I do look forward to trying to work with Commissioners Kramer and McComb to see if there's a way that we can actually move it back the other way, where it actually starts to benefit the suburban commuters, because it is going, I think, completely in the wrong direction for reasons that I don't support. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McKeon. I think we now actually are done with public comment. Okay, so with that, the next item on our agenda is the consent calendar on page 4 of your packet. Does anyone wish to remove anything from consent? Seeing none, I will move that we approve the consent calendar as presented, and including the items from the meeting of the Legal Affairs Committee and the Police Committee held earlier this evening. Second. Thank you for that second. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. For the adoption of the consent calendar, Mr. Churchill.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Ms. S. Kramer.
Yes.
Ms. G. Kramer.
Yes.
Mr. McComb.
Yes.
Mr. McKeon.
Yes.
Ms. O'Neill.
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson.
Aye.
Mr. Whalen.
Yes.
Mr. Zellow.
Aye.
Mr. Sinai.
Yes.
The consent calendar is duly adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We are now on to the approval, the extension of the 206, 216 Bala Avenue and 5 through 9 North Highland Avenue in Bala Cynwyd. This item, appreciate all the public comment from earlier. The applicant has requested that this item be tabled for this evening. So I'm going to move that we table to a date uncertain. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. I guess we vote on that, right? So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so that will come back at some later date, perhaps. The next item on our agenda is the Finance Committee. It's page 45, and that is the ARP allocations. And I know there's going to be some discussion on this. Here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start by making a motion as it is presented here, and asking for a second of that. And then I'm going to make a motion to amend that, and we'll see how that goes. I will move that we approve the allocation of the remaining balance of $14,781,890 of Federal American Rescue Plan, ARP funds. I am doing this in the right order, yeah, okay. The receipt by the township, as indicated below, we have the AACC Palm for $4 million, Ashbridge House for $1 million, Stormwater for $3,533,000, the South Ardmore Park Playground for $696,000, the property acquisition for the Cynwyd Heritage Trail Affordable Housing for $1 million, the accelerating the playground renovations for $668,000, the Cynwyd Heritage Trail NFS Tunnel for $1 million, the EV purchases from the equipment fund for $250,000, the accessible playground for $700,000, nonprofit grants for $1,572,197, and Narberth ambulance for $362,693. I have a second for that. Thank you, Commissioner Courtney. So let me just give some background, and then you make a proposed amendment. The ARP of this funding process started a couple years ago, where we had an initial tranche of ARP funds that this board voted to do some allocations with. We are now on to a second tranche of funds, which includes a number of money plus some interest on the money that we've been allocated that has not yet been spent or dispersed. So the process had two parts, or two components. One was we had an ARP engagement committee, and the ARP engagement committee was tasked with sort of soliciting or canvassing the community to try and get a sense of items that would fall outside the township's umbrella for implementation for what could be done with these funds. And then we had the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee was really tasked with what items under the township's umbrella could be on the docket. So the ARP Engagement Committee, after a process of engagement, came up with a process for soliciting applications from entities that are not the township. And that process includes a rubric. That process includes a number of recommendations that they've made for that. The Finance Committee was tasked with proposing to the board allocations of funding to each of the buckets, including the items that are under the township's umbrella, and an allocation that would be for the items that from entities that were not under the township's umbrella. And that's what we discussed in Finance Committee last week. So where does that put us? Well, with the ARP funds, we make allocations to specific projects that can be funded that are eligible with the ARP funds. And we have a set of projects that are identified because they're under the township's umbrella. And we have a set of potential projects that are not yet identified because one of the people who made public comment earlier said, like, those still have to be solicited and they still have to come in. And so we need to make sort of like a allowance for the fact that we might get future proposals that the board should consider to be funded. Now, we can't actually consider funding them until we have those because we need specific things to fund, but we want to make sure that we have capacity to fund worthy proposals that come in, and the decision of what to fund comes at that second stage, right? So we have a whole stage that we're not going to deal with this evening, which is the stage of soliciting and identifying what the criteria and the scoring and the rubric would be for applications from entities that are not township entities. That's not the agenda for tonight. For tonight, the agenda is the items that have been specified, identified under the township's umbrella, and how much of the funding that we have to not allocate at this point, to effectively hold in abeyance for the next stage. So there is powder dry, dry powder, I guess, put that correctly, for that stage. So that's where we are. And we had this discussion last week. So I'm going to propose the following amendments, and let me explain them as I do them. Okay. So the first is the chart on page 46. There is a line labeled nonprofit grants. In my first proposed, I'm going to put these as one amendment. The first element of this amendment is to change that title to be funds unallocated until after receipt of proposals from non-township organizations. Okay? And the reason is simply, mechanically, we cannot actually make an allocation to nonprofit grants that we haven't yet identified. So to be accurate about it, let's just say it what we're actually going to do, which is we're not going to allocate that money right now, and we're going to wait to see what comes in, and then we're going to deal with that later. Okay, so that's going to be the first part. The second is the amount of funds in that category. And this is a tricky part from my perspective, because this is a question of how much dry powder should we as a board kind of hold back in order to leave ourselves capacity to fully consider worthwhile applications that come in. That is tough to do, right? It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem where you're trying to guess at how much money you want to hold back without actually knowing what is out there, but you don't know what's out there until you say kind of how much money you're going to put there. So we're kind of trying to triangulate on this, and I will be the first to say that this is not like the most scientific of exercises to try and pin this down, and I think the people who are on the committees, they can speak for themselves, but I suspect they would recognize that as well. So I tried to calibrate. I mean, I think one of the things that I tried to keep in mind is what is the potential scope for what can be done with this. And just, I took some time to look at the ARP allocation rules for that category to help me calibrate this. And so what can you do? So recipients may use funds for programs, services, and capital expenditures that respond to the public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic. And they must be related and reasonably proportional to the pandemic impact identified, and reasonably designed to benefit the impacted population or class, right? So that's like the eligibility description. And then the question is, who is eligible to receive them? And there's a few criteria, but really the main one is low or moderate income households or communities are what's defined as impacted households. And instead of identifying households that were specifically impacted under the current rules, you get to say this entire category of low and moderate income households will qualify. Like, what income is that? It's 300% or less of the federal poverty line, okay, which is currently around like $27,000. So 3 times that, or income at or below 65% of the area median income for the county. And this is something who's worked on affordable housing knows, is that the Montgomery County area median income is a lot less than Lower Merion area median income. We're probably looking at the relevant number here being 3 times the federal poverty line, right? That's a fairly finite number of households in this township, if one were to limit one's attention to just households in that category. And then, there's a set of categories of projects that are eligible to be supported if they serve those people, right? So it is this interaction of particular categories of projects. one thing that this board has talked about much, food insecurity, right? Like, that's an eligible category, right? Like, especially, food insecurity that has, has a shortfall due to serving these people in the pandemic. But it has to be the people of the income categories that are identified as the impacted, right? So it's that interaction. The two is like the set of things that can be funded. So this is one of the reasons why one of the things that we as a board have discussed is that the administrative burden here is high, right? Because you have to document these things. You have to document who is being served, so it's the impacted class, and you have to document what is being done, so it's actually an eligible activity, because both those things matter. So without getting too long-winded about it, I tried to put all this together in my head to try and calibrate where I thought was, a sufficient capacity to cover the kinds of things that might come in, right? And so I am going to propose that we have that line item be $1,050,000. That happens to be a little bit above what the ARP Engagement Committee had put for, its socioeconomic needs category, its urgent needs category. I padded it some relative to that number because I wanted to allow it for administrative cost. And I think we don't really know what those are until we know what number we allocate. So I want, that's the logic for that. And then that leaves the third element here. It leaves $522,197, which would put in the stormwater category for a total of $4,055,197. Stormwater is one of the 4 food groups of the ARP, right? That you're supposed to use the money for. And so that's going to be the proposed amendment. Before I ask for a second on that, let me just say the following, which is that it is tempting to focus on these individual items because we've kind of distilled down to that. I will say the following. At this point, we are discussing, I think, the remaining 2% of the ARP funds. But also, when we take a look at the projects that we have, it looks like we're going to approve for funding altogether. They provide services to the elderly. They provide services to, lower moderate income or traditionally minority communities. They provide services to the community through community centers. There is a lot of, at least in my eye, overlap between these categories in terms of the populations that they serve. Okay? And so, anyway, so that's going to be my proposed amendment. Hopefully I explained my logic for it. Hopefully I was clear about where I'm kind of using judgment rather than hard facts in hands above the table, admitting to where that is. Anyway, do I have a second for that amendment? Okay, thank you, Commissioner Stevenson. Any comments on the amendment? Commissioner Kramer.
$1,050,000 is less than the interest that we've gotten on the money that we received. We had $203,000 of unfunded CDBG requests that were unfunded in large part because we used the CDBG money to subsidize township salaries instead of providing them out to meet direct needs in the community. We've had a request from, and that's for 1 year, and there's several years left that we can address. Then the Narberth Community Food Bank has requested money from us to deal with the food insecurity needs. Eldernet has expressed an interest in having additional funds to continue our Restaurant Meals for Food Banks program. There are other nonprofits that lost money during COVID, like Union Fire Association, that lost rental money, significant rental money, that had requested that be reimbursed out of our first round of allocation of the ARP money. And I would expect that they, if we now have money available for these purposes, that they may come back and ask for that. We have identified significant affordable housing needs in the community. We have the ability to provide direct grants under the ARP to people with significant needs. And that doesn't even address what Triad identified, which is significant mental health issues in the community. We had a proposal some time ago from members of the Health Advisory Council to try to do outreach and to try to address some of the mental health issues due to COVID. And of course, we didn't fund it at that time, but I'm sure that those needs still exist. They still existed last summer when Triad did their needs assessment. And I think that we should not make this amendment. We should leave that money available until we see the scope of the good proposals that come in on how to help people in this community. We can always put more into stormwater later. There is no urgency to our decision to put that extra money right now into stormwater until we see what these needs are. If the proposals come in at $1 million, then we will have, or $1,050,000, then we will still have plenty of time to take that money and put it into stormwater. If the proposals come in at $4 million, we will have already allocated everything to stormwater, and we will again be in the position of shortchanging the people who, dozens and dozens of whom have come to our meetings to talk to us here at these meetings about their needs, and the dozens of people who came, scores of people who came to the sessions with what Triad had to speak about their needs and the needs of the other people in the community. There's no reason that extra $500,000 has to be allocated to stormwater tonight. We can leave it unallocated and wait 6 months, and we still have plenty of time to put it into another category, a category like stormwater, or some of the other priorities that were identified by Triad, including the need for weatherization and sustainability improvements for not just low-income people who are going to be eligible for the county's program, but which only is going to have $6 million total, but also our moderate income residents, many of whom really were hurt a lot during COVID by job losses and who probably still haven't completely recovered. And we had proposed a program that the ARP committee had recommended for $1.75 million to go into just Lower Merion to help address that need and also simultaneously address sustainability issues. And that was cut completely on the theory that the $6 million that the county has would be plenty to cover people in Lower Merion, many of whom, because they're moderate income, will not be eligible for the proposal or the program that the county is going to have. So I think that there are a lot of things that we ought to be looking at. There's no need to rush into putting everything into stormwater tonight, and I cannot support this amendment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with comments? Commissioner Sean Kramer.
Thank you. I appreciate both President Sinai's comments and Commissioner Kramer's comments. I think that you both make excellent points.
while I'd prefer to have more flexibility and have the 1.5 million remain available, to fund good proposals if they come through, I can also live with this amendment if it is a comfortable compromise for my colleagues, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, we really don't know what number we're talking about, but I think that your guess is as good as any, that $1 million is going to be sufficient. And secondly, we will have flexibility later on down the line. If I understand correctly, Manager McNeely was explaining that we may have yet another allocation process in about a year, if there's money left over from interest and from any money that doesn't get spent for one reason or another, and we can we can look at those proposals again at that point if we need to. So I'm comfortable either way, and I appreciate President Sinai trying to apply some data to a process that has not been particularly data-driven.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Commissioner Grimes.
Yes, thank you, President Sinai. I am comfortable with the amendment that President Sinai has suggested. We have a lot of needs in this community, and this money will not solve any of those needs totally, but it will help. It's a start for many of these. Everything on this list, and even things that we're choosing possibly not to fund, are important. The stormwater is important. I think that there's some sense that we've heard that stormwater isn't an emergency in this community. I get, and I think many of us get, complaints about stormwater issues all the time, and we need to address it as quickly as possible with the resources we're able to do. And even if we do that, I have to take issue with the terminology that we're shortchanging any residents in this community if we agree to President Sinai's amendments. We are allocating, the proposal, even with the amendment, is over $1 million to the nonprofits. There are other monies that we have allocated to nonprofits in the past. We will continue to offer other money to nonprofits, and there are other sources. I think that not addressing stormwater in the way that was recommended by the Engagement Committee initially, and I believe by the Finance Committee, I think not allocating those resources would be a mistake. So without going on, I'll just want to emphasize, at least my vote is not shortchanging, in my view, anybody. It is helping people to the extent that we reasonably can throughout the entire list. So I hope my colleagues will endorse it, the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Any other comments? Commissioner Zoll.
President Sinai, I very much appreciate your amendment. It was a difficult discussion a week ago with a split board. This amendment makes sense. There are not, I would take issue with the phrase dozens and dozens of groups that have come before us. I'm not sure that's accurate. And when it comes to home improvements, Montgomery County with a staff, with experience, with a mission, and $6.2 million from Pennsylvania, that's the ideal place for that program to be, and not at all ideal for it to be in a township that has neither the staff nor the experience to provide such a program. I think that Commissioner Sinai, President Sinai, you've explained this extremely well, better than it was explained a week ago, and we're trying to come up with a number without data, and compromise is the approach that makes the most sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Zilov. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, I guess I will call the vote on the amendment. this is just raising your hand, I guess. So all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Okay. Opposed? Okay, abstentions? Okay. So that brings us to the actual motion, and so now we have an amendment motion. Sorry, it was 11 to 1, right? Yeah, sorry. So this is a commissioner comment on the motion as amended. Okay. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we will vote on that. So all those. So sorry, Jody. Is this hands again? Okay, so all those in favor of the amended motion, or the motion as amended, please raise your hand. Okay. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, Madam Secretary, that passes unanimously. So with that, we turn to the next item on our agenda. And that is the public hearing and adoption of ordinance for Chapter A180, the Historic Resource Inventory, 335 Riders Ferry Road, Bala, Cynwyd. It's page 47 of your packet. And this is an ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter A180, Historic Resource Inventory, to add 335 Riders Ferry Road to the Historic Resource Inventory as a Class 2 resource. This ordinance was authorized for advertisement to the stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners held April 19th, 2023, and duly advertised in the June 4th, 2023, and June 11th, 2023 editions of the Mainline Times and Suburban. So I'm going to open the public hearing and start with public comment. So does anyone in the room wish to make public comment on this ordinance?
Laura Gillen, Haverford. The intent of this ordinance, as outlined on the Montgomery County Planning Commission, is to amend the list of structures and objects, specifically to add what's called the Miller Bell House and the barn ruins to the inventory. And if you go back to the Historical Commission meetings, that's actually the language they used, which was the Miller Bell House and the barn ruins. There's no means within our code to add an address, and so the ordinance continues to be improperly written. And that's regardless of the so-called edit or correction to the definition of historic resource in the zoning code. The rest of our code, notably Chapter 88 and Chapter A180 and the other sections of 155, they consistently and define and describe historic resources as building sites, structures, and objects. Any attempt to add a historic resource to the historic resource inventory must define the resource that you're trying to add, and not just list the address where that resource is located. The appropriate way to do this, as I've said before, is actually to include the historic resource information form, that is the inventory database entry, with the proposed ordinance. But at a minimum, this ordinance needs to be rewritten to identify the resources that you want to add to the inventory. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Jody, do anyone online?
No one online has their hand raised.
Okay. Then I'm going to close the public hearing, and I move that we adopt ordinance number 4269, the chapter to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion. Do we have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Questions on this ordinance? We have the Director of Building and Planning here, or comments from commissioners? Okay, seeing none. This is a roll call vote. I actually get this one right this time. So, Madam Secretary.
For the adoption of ordinance 4269, Mr. Churchill.
Yes.
From the list here, Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Ms. G. Kramer. Yes. Mr. McComb.
Yes.
Mr. McKeon.
Yes.
Ms. O'Neill. Aye. Mr. Stevenson.
Aye.
Mr. Whalen. And Ms. Matlin. Mr. Zello.
Aye.
Mr. Sinai.
Yes.
The ordinance is duly adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We're now on, excuse me, page 51 of your packet. It's a public hearing and adoption of ordinance chapter 155 zoning, the wireless facilities updates. So here's what's going to happen, because we have several of these. I am going to open the public hearing. We're going to take public comment if there is any, and then I'm going to move to continue the public hearing. So, and we are going to actually vote on these this evening. So, open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to comment on, we'll take it all together, any of the wireless facilities updates? Okay, so no one here. Anyone online, Jody?
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we continue the public hearing until the July 19th, 2023 Board of Commissioners meeting, and we will consider adoption at that time. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. All those in favor of continuing the public hearing, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Madam Secretary, that passes. We're now on page 70, which is adoption of ordinance chapter 140, telecommunications facilities or wireless facilities updates. The same motion, move that we postpone consideration of adoption until the July 19th, 2023 Board of Commissioners meeting. Thank you, Commissioner McComb, for a second. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That too passes. We're now on adoption of the ordinance chapter A167 fees wireless facilities updates on page 188 of your packet. Again, I will move that we postpone consideration of adoption until the July 19th, 2023 Board of Commissioners meeting. Thank you, Commissioner McComb, for that second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? That too passes. We are now on page 91 of your packet, which is the adoption of ordinance chapter 90, health and sanitation, regulating single-use plastic carryout bags. And so I'm going to start by moving for the adoption of ordinance number 4270, which is an ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion, chapter 90, health and sanitation, by the addition of a new article prohibiting retail establishments from providing single-use plastic carryout bags to customers, setting forth the purpose of such prohibition, making findings, providing definitions, requiring signage, giving notice of the prohibition, and providing for the enforcement of the regulations, including the imposition of fines. This ordinance was authorized for advertisement to the stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners held May 17th, 2023, and duly advertised in the June 11th, 2023 edition of the Mainline Times and Suburban. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. So any commissioner questions for our township manager or comments on this ordinance? Okay, seeing none. This was an ordinance that we discussed at length before advertising, and I think one of the things that at least many commissioners cited as something that put them in favor of this has been the city of Philadelphia's experience with basically the same ordinance, right? Which appears to have been very successful there. Madam Secretary, we need a roll call vote.
For the adoption of ordinance 4270, Mr. Churchill.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
Ms. S. Kramer.
Yes.
Mr. McComb.
Yes.
Mr. McCann.
Yes.
Ms. O'Neill.
Aye.
Mr. Stevenson.
Aye.
Mr. Whalen.
Yes.
Mr. Zella.
Aye.
Mr. Sinai.
Yes.
The ordinance is duly adopted.
Okay. So, is there unfinished business? Is there any unfinished business to come before the board? Okay, seeing none. Before we go to new business, I know Commissioner Gilda Kramer wants to speak to a couple of things. As she's sitting down, I will note that this month is Pride Month, and I will turn over to Commissioner Gilda Kramer to say something about that before I will then turn it over to her after that to make some announcements. Okay.
Pride Month is an issue that is near and dear to the hearts of many of us. And it is a time to recognize and celebrate the LGBTQ members of our community. In this time of intolerance and culture wars that often demonize our LGBTQ family members, friends and neighbors, and in some countries even sentence them to death because of who they are, it is especially important that we reaffirm our support for all members of our community. Every year I talk about how our Lower Merion Township Human Relations Commission was created in 2010 in part to address the fact that at that time no federal or state laws provided employment protections to LGBTQ members of our community. These issues
were left to local municipalities to regulate in a patchwork of laws or lack thereof across Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, 13 years later, still has not enacted needed statewide legislation to protect all members of our community from discrimination, though the legislature is finally considering such statewide protections. Meanwhile, our ordinance continues to provide critical protections to those who live and work in our township. We should all be advocating for acceptance of and inclusion of, non-discrimination against, and pride in the valued and much loved members of our LGBTQ Lower Merion community.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Now ask if you have any announcements you want to make this evening.
Yes. The Neighborhood Club of Bala is having its annual 4th of July parade and celebration on, of course, 4th of July. Mark your calendars and don't miss this very fun special event. It will kick off from Union Fire Association at 9 o'clock in the morning for a parade. Decorate your bicycles, bring your flags, wear red, white, and blue, and take your walk or bike ride through the community and up Bala Avenue, where there may be some special surprises. We'll end up at the Bala Playground, and you can ruin your clothes with an egg toss. You can have races, even for people who are probably too old to be racing and too young to be racing. And you can hear patriotic music and get delicious kosher hot dogs. So please come to our special celebration on the 4th of July.
Okay, thank you. Anyone with any other new business, because you will not be able to top that. Okay, seeing none, this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you all.